Okay, good evening, everybody, and formally now welcome to Preservation New Jersey's virtual series Q&A with PNJ. Please note that, as I just said, this evening's program is being recorded, so please keep yourself on mute until the end when you can participate in our Q&A. And we hope you will do that. Take advantage of the expert we have here before us. My name is Melissa Ziopro, and I am the Specialist Professor of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch. But for this event, I am wearing my PNJ board member hat. I am tonight's host, but I want to give a quick shout out to our very hardworking executive director, Kelly Raffel, and our president, Paul, and our education committee chair, Mark, and our incredible office coordinator, Dale, and all of our other board members. Everything we do here at Preservation New Jersey really is a team effort. If you're not familiar with Preservation New Jersey, if you just stumbled across this program on the internet somewhere, let me just tell you a little bit about our organization. It was founded in 1978, and it is a statewide member-supported nonprofit historic preservation organization that promotes economic vitality, sustainability, and heritage of New Jersey's diverse communities through advocacy and education. You can learn more about what we do and how to get involved on our website, preservationnewjersey.org. Kelly's actually been working on an intensive revamp of the website. So if you haven't been for a while, please do check it out. We are perhaps most well known for our annual 10 Most Endangered Historic Places in New Jersey list, which draws attention to remarkable sites and their many challenges. We hope that listing them will serve as a catalyst for change and positive solutions can be found for their preservation. We also publish informational materials and toolkits, and we host events like this. We have a number of events in addition to this one tonight coming up. For example, in the near future, our tour of historic downtown Freehold, which is this Saturday. So we hope to see many of you in person there. And there's just so much more coming up. We've been really busy under Kelly's leadership. So again, you can find more on our website at preservationnewjersey.org. So tonight's program, again, this is Q&A with PNJ. This is something that we started to reach people during the pandemic. This series seeks to highlight voices across New Jersey's historic preservation community and bring their knowledge and expertise on a wide variety of topics to the public. And we've kept up with the program these 3+ years later, because why not? As long as we have PNJ folks who are willing to volunteer to host and wonderful experts like Brianne this evening who are willing to volunteer their time, we are happy to provide this service. You can find dozens of past Q&A with PNJs from the past 3 years freely accessible on our YouTube channel. So tonight, I've referenced her name a few times. We are sitting down with Brianne Van Vorst of Liberty Stained Glass Conservation, LLC. Brianne is headquartered in Freehold, and you'll actually see her on Saturday if you make it to our tour over there, and we hope that you will. Brianne is exceedingly talented, a star in this field. She completed an MA in Stained Glass Conservation and Cultural Heritage Management at the University of York in England. After graduating, she returned to her home state of New Jersey and worked for a private studio before opening her own consulting firm, as I said, Liberty Stained Glass Conservation, in 2016. She has worked on some incredible projects, and she has so much to share. The topics that we will cover this evening will include things like how stained glass was historically manufactured, how stained glass ages, how to approach repairs, and much, much more. So we're going to start with Brianne delivering some prepared remarks, and then we will have plenty of time for a robust Q&A. With all those announcements out of the way, Brianne, you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Melissa, I need you to turn your share over to me, I believe.
We just practiced this too. Let's see.
How's that?
There we go. Yep, I can see you.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming. It's just so nice and flattering that you've all logged in to hear what I have to say. I really appreciate it. And as Melissa said, we're going to talk about stained glass, sort of its beginnings, where we're at now, and how to take care of it. I could go on and on, as I'm sure you can imagine, but I will refrain. Brevity has never been my strongest suit, but I should be able to get through these slides in about 20 minutes, leaving plenty of time for the Q&A. It's important for me to start by saying that, stained glass, the way they made it in the medieval period is more or less how we still make it today. So the craft in general has changed over time very little. There is one monumental turning point, which I will get into. There are three main components, that is glass, lead, and decoration, and I will identify those for you and tell you how they behave over time. First of all, we're going to start with antique glass. Although the word antique, you might think that that means old, although it is a very old way of making glass. It doesn't necessarily relate to a period because we still make glass this way today. Antique glass starts with the ingredients of glass in a furnace. It becomes molten, and I can show you this little guy here on this cute little antiquarian drawing has gathered the glass on the end of the blowpipe, is blowing air into it to create a shape like a cylinder. The cylinder is cut and laid flat into a sheet of glass. This is a very linear process as shown in this drawing. Obviously, in real life, it is a little bit more time consuming and cumbersome. The glass has to be reheated multiple times in order to get through this process. But the result, as you can see on the bottom left, is this really beautiful surface that is inconsistent and reflects light in all of different ways. You might be, if you live in a historic home or in a historic town, you're probably familiar with this type of mouth-blown antique glass in wood sash windows and true divided light windows. This here is also very popular in historical American glass and is still made today. It is antique glass made through the crown method. You can see this little guy here in the back. Instead of blowing it into a cylinder, it is turned into this big circle. The little dimple in the middle is actually where the blowpipe was connected to the glass. All aspects of this sheet would have been used and cut into smaller sheets, but also the center called the roundel would have been used as well. It didn't take long for humans to work smarter and not harder. The mouth-blown process was improved upon by industrialization, really. So the molten glass was soon poured on an iron table and forced through rollers to create finished sheets. At the apex of glass making, there was any number of colors and textures made in this method. You can imagine, here are some historic trade catalogs. You can see all these different textures. I really love this Australian example on the right, which is actually the company actually leaded together the glass to show their clients in person. You could hold it up to the sun and see how the light behaved with it, which is a very cool version of a catalog. But you can imagine how hard it is to match some of these textures today. When the firms went out of business or when the rollers were damaged or changed, some of these designs were proprietary. So it's very difficult to come across a lot of these today. A question that I get asked a lot, which I didn't realize that people didn't know, the term stained glass relates to how the glass is decorated, which I will share in just a few minutes. Not all glass is stained in the sense the way wood would be stained, if that makes sense. So metallic oxides are added to glass during the process, which yield a color. So if you add iron, you will get a green. If you add copper, you will get a red. So I just want to make it very clear that most of the glass you're seeing in stained glass windows is inherently colored all the way through. The metal matrix is an extremely important part of the process here, obviously. Traditionally, it is lead. We also see copper and zinc. Those were included over time. Lead has a heart and a flange on either side. This little section here is where the glass would sit. Lead cames come in all different sizes, profiles. You can see here's 4 or 5 historic examples of different profiles. A and B are generally tend to be the most common that we see every day. Cane comes in long strips. Obviously, lead is malleable, so it is stretched around the individual pieces of glass, held in place with glazing nails in a process called glazing, which will ultimately make your panel, and it is soldered on both sides. This is really the namesake where we get the term stained glass. So glass can be decorated in a couple different ways. We're going to go over 3 today. On the left, in this wonderful 1408 example from York Minster, you see God the Father. This decoration is completely rendered with a paint called grisaille, means glass paint. And what it is ground up glass, and it and a binder is added to it. It comes in powder. You add the ingredients. It ends up yielding the consistency pretty much of acrylic paint. You paint it on. Glass paint is extremely fragile before it is fired. You can scratch away at it, which is how the technique here was achieved. And after it is fired, the thought here is because it's made of ground up glass, it will essentially fuse to the base glass and be permanent. That's the goal. The center image here is silver stain. Silver stain is where the term stained glass actually does come from. It is silver nitrate. Again, it comes in a powder. It is mixed with a vehicle. It is added to the exterior side of the glass, and it is fired. There is a chemical process that occurs in the kiln, which legitimately stains the glass. Now, silver stain produces a lemony yellow, as you can see right here, all the way up through a darker amber color. So you're really in the yellow, orange, light red spectrum. And that is where the term stained glass comes. Again, this is changing the base color of the glass inherently, like a traditional stain in the sense of wood, I guess. And on the right, you're seeing what is known as enamel paint. Whereas in God the Father, all of these little lines are one color, enamel paint has a much larger range of color. I like this example actually because the yellow would be the silver stain, but the blue and the green are the enamel paint. So you can see, as compared to the grisaille and God the Father, which are little tiny lines individually, you're covering a larger surface area with the enamel paint. And that's important because A, enamel fires at a lower temperature, and then B, you have this wider surface area that you're using to cover. So traditionally, enamel can be kind of unstable in certain circumstances, which as a conservator is something that, can be troublesome for me. I want to talk about the opalescent era because, as I said, stained glass didn't change for about 1,000 years, but really it kind of did once the Americans got their hands on it. We are a group of innovators, always have been. So I've chosen 2 very famous examples that you could go and see tomorrow if you wanted. One at the Philadelphia Museum on the left by John Lafarge, and of course, the Agnes Northrop for Tiffany Studios landscape on the right at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This period in American stained glass changed from the antique glass and the rolled glass that I showed you earlier, because at this point, glass is becoming semi-opaque. The glass was manipulated during the cooling process to force crystallization, making the glass appear, changing how it's conducting light through it, really. It has this wonderful milky quality, sparkly quality that your transparent glass doesn't have. Also, a hallmark of this period is a process called plating, which I will show you, where you're using layers of glass. They're using very little glass paint at this point. The example on the left has quite a lot of flesh exposed, which is enamel paint. But if you could believe it, the window on the right has, I believe, 0 glass paint. All of that design, color, texture is rendered through only glass and the metal that's holding it together. I love drapery glass. My Tiffany enthusiasts do as well. Louis Tiffany used this really successfully during the cooling process. They were, this isn't a technical term, but smooshing the cooling glass in order to get these wonderful folds of drapery. I was on a Zoom earlier this week with Lindsay Parrott, who's on this call, actually, the director and curator of the Neustadt collection of Tiffany glass in New York City. And she reminded me and reminded everyone how a lot of the designers working in this time were traditional painters. So they were very, very able and skilled at drapery, creating drapery in paintings. So this type of glass, without being able to use paint in the same way, glass was able to render these wonderful swaths of drapery and in clothing. And on the left, you see it in transmitted light. You can see the darker areas from where the glass is folded to create the shadow and the texture. And on the right, in reflected glass, this is a little bit of a dirty piece, but you get my point. You could see the fabric sort of pooling at the base of the figure by her ankles. Couple different types of glass that were added during, or that were used widely during the opalescent era. On the left, you have confetti glass, sometimes called, or excuse me, foliage glass, sometimes called confetti glass, with these little chips of color, often used in garden type situations. And on the right, ripple. Again, this is used in foliage, but we often see it in water as well. And this was manipulated as well through the glass making process. This is one of my favorite windows. It is a project I am finishing up right now at Grace Church in Millbrook, New York. This was made by Maitland Armstrong and Company. This is a really good example of opalescent glass. You're seeing only the glass paint in the flesh of the figures as well as in the inscriptions, so in the letters. The plating is really magnificent and is what is rendering these colors. The base layer is this, what you're looking at right here. So the yellow is indicating where the lead is. The black background is indicating where the glass is. This is the majority of the window. So the whole design is right here. It gets more complicated, however, because on the left, you see the interior plates. These are very large plates that were placed over the base layer to filter and control the light and to modify the color. And then on the right in the pink, you're seeing the exterior plates. So there's far fewer of these, but there was a third layer added in specific areas to control the light and the design and the color. On the left, you're seeing what that interior plate looks like. So you can see it has a milky opalescent quality, and behind it, you see the base layer sort of peeking through. And on the right-hand side, here is an exterior plate. So this would be the third layer in this situation right here. And as well up here, you can see how much thicker this lead is, because this is, of course, a third layer of glass. So this window is really special to me. I see a lot of windows and they're all wonderful and unique and great, but every once in a while, one really sort of captivates me. And Maitland Armstrong worked with his daughter, Helen, who ultimately is who did the glass painting, and she painted these faces of the angel on the left and Mary Magdalene on the right. And I think even I gave you only a little cursory overview of glass paint, but you can imagine what this took to execute. And it's just really, really sophisticated and incredible. Every single hair was thought out. Every single little line was painted. It's really just absolutely gorgeous. As the opalescent area was a strong period of innovation, I explained about the opalescent glass and the plating. And I just want to add a remark that, this is such a time of experimentation. So things were new, being done for the first time. Maitland Armstrong here has this unique way. It's called hanging plates. So you can see the shadow of Christ right here. On the exterior, it is only leaded around the top. I had to look at this for a long time, but here it finally dawned on me that the little feet, he soldered little feet of lead underneath the matrix to hold this in place. So the reason he didn't just lead around the whole thing like every other plate is because if he would have added a lead line here, it would have created this harsh line around the shadow, which would be really unnatural. So this is something that Maitland Armstrong himself, sort of invented and did often in his artwork. It's not something you see. I've never seen any other maker do, but I'm showing this one piece of glass to you just to try to illustrate the level of experimentation and uniqueness that is happening in American stained glass in this period of time. So how a window is made, I'm going to tell you in 9 easy steps how a window is made, just in case you don't know. So on the left, a cartoon, or excuse me, a design is submitted to the client. Let's just assume that the client loves it and accepts it without any edits immediately, in which case the design is turned into what we call a cartoon. Now, this is a full-scale rendering, 1-to-1, of what the window opening size actually is. Of course, the design on the left is not the same cartoon that you're seeing on the right. I liked the picture on the right. I thought it was very clear of how you can see this design right here, how it is enlarged. And this is also a really important part of the process because it's telling you where the lead is going to go. In the design phase, you're not seeing where the lead lines are going to be. In the cartoon phase, you are. I've heard often, since I've been working in America, that people feel that the lead is somehow less important, or the metal matrix is somehow less important than the glass aspect. I disagree. And I think that this is a compelling argument as to why. I mean, the size, the profile, the placement of the lead is thought out very, very early on, as you can see here. The next part of the process would be a glass selection. And then that cartoon that I just showed you is copied and decreased into what we would call a cut line. So what you're seeing here, these lines, these pen lines indicate where the heart of the lead would be. So this is the exact size of the glass that you need it to be in order for it to fit in the size of the cartoon. And of course, the size of the window opening. The glass is then cut. Today we use a diamond wheeled glass cutter. The medieval gentlemen used a hot iron that was heated in a forge that they would trace the design on the glass and then shock with cold water so it would break. They had us do it in graduate school. It is extremely, extremely hard. If you don't think medieval stained glass is a miracle, just not knowing anything about it, the fact that they cut it with a hot iron and cold water is really, really just an incredible feat. So you see this person here tracing their little piece of the pattern and scoring it with the diamond glass cutter, which will then be broken for the shape. I can't stress enough how important it is that you are accurate, or that it is accurately done in this phase. If every piece is just a tiny bit too big, the window is going to be too big. It's not going to fit in the hole. It's going to be very embarrassing for everyone. So after the glass is all cut, it has then, if there's paint in the design, the opportunity to be painted, which you can see here. This person is, doing the flesh and the hair of the figure. Once all the paint is complete, it is fired in a kiln. Glass paint can be fired multiple times depending on the design and what effect is, warranted or needed. Once the firing is complete or multiple firings are complete, the window can be glazed. So again, you see the strips of cane being put in the window and the glass following the original rubbing, or in restoration, you don't necessarily use a cartoon, you use a rubbing, which is the map of what already exists. So you see that here. After it's put together, this is me right here. After it's put together, you solder all of the joints together, and this creates, the matrix that holds it all together on both sides of the window. And then what is arguably the most important part of this process, weatherproofing, happens. Stained glass weatherproofing material is linseed oil based. When it's on the tougher side, it's the consistency of silly putty, but it could be much more viscous. It is pressed underneath all of the lead cames, and this is what makes sure the panel does not leak and allow water into the building. It is super tedious. It is very difficult. It takes a long time. It's most people's least favorite thing, but it's so important because no one wants their windows to leak. The linseed oil tends to leave, it is oil-based, so it leaves sort of a sheen or a shine or a little bit of slime behind. So at that point, we would use sawdust or whiting to polish the panel. You apply it as you see here, and you buff it off to make sure that the oil is absorbed off of the panel. And then our last step is to install. There's a couple different ways to install stained glass windows, a couple different materials, but today we're going to talk about wood and stone. So on the left, you see a typical wood sash. This is not unlike a regular true divided light double hung sash. So you have the rabbet, the stained glass is put into the rabbet. It is fixed with some type of glazing pin, nail, molding, what have you. And then, with putty and sealant as well on the exterior. I just want to point out the importance of the saddle bar, which is a support bar. In wood sashes, it's drilled into the frame. There are copper tie wires, which you can see here, that are fixed to the stained glass panel, to the leading. The panel's installed with the wires, then the support bar is installed, and then the wires are twisted around the bar. You might think, what is she talking about with these bars? Who cares? The bars are really important. They actually carry the weight of the window. They're structurally supporting the entire thing. So if the bars are inadequate, misplaced, not connected properly, it's going to be a very big problem later. And then we have stone settings on the right. So typical glazing grooves, historically, the way that they're done, the stone cutter, when they set the building, would create the glazing groove. One side of the glazing groove is deeper than the other, so that's located, and the person installing will put the window into the deeper side, which gives them enough clearance to set it into the opening. And again, bars are drilled into the stone much the same way they are into the wood sash, and the tie wires are secured. So now that you know what you need to know about how stained glass is historically made, we're going to talk about what affects it. Water. So most of us are familiar with water. We've lived through Hurricane Sandy here in New Jersey. We know that even on the best day, water will corrode metal. It will erode the shoreline. It can be, a really difficult thing. So here are two examples of condensation just sitting on the face of the glass on a day that it is not raining. And what that means is that it can and will ultimately degrade glass. So the left-hand example is a very interesting example from Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. The orange that you're seeing is actually quartz. It is not glass. The rest of the jewels in here are all glass. And of course it is held together with lead. But the stone is, the quartz in the window is so deeply affected by water, because this is exposed to the outside, that it's appears very cloudy on the inside, and it's clearly very textured and degrading. On the right hand side, you're seeing a phenomena called pitting. Now this is Tiffany glass. It seems, from what I understand, that Tiffany and his glassmakers may have, sort of did a fashion over function type of thing, may have, whether knowingly or not, I just don't know, but it seems like they might have sacrificed the chemistry to get the color or the texture that they were looking for, because we do find a lot of unstable Tiffany glasses, which we don't see very often in antique or cathedral rolled glasses. Glass corrosion like this or pitting we see in medieval glass all the time, and it's because the chemistry is off. So again, this is an irreversible process of glass corrosion that is definitely exacerbated by water. The same with glass paint. So because, as I told you before, glass paint is basically made of ground up glass, it is therefore susceptible to the same forms of degradation that regular glass is. So this wonderful Tiffany angel, who I think we can all tell was once an absolute stunning beauty, is really suffering because of the glass paint. We would call this catastrophic paint loss. Not to be dramatic, but that's the term. And, all of the important features that would make her have been since lost, and the effect is really quite unsettling. A couple more examples of paint loss just to show you how it can behave differently. On the left, I mean, you can't really see it, you're going to have to trust me, but it was once a floral still life executed in enamel. The enamel is again catastrophically lost. And the angel on the right. I like this example too, because you can see that the enamel in the skin tone exists in the hand and a little bit in the face. It's mostly lost in the feet, and the grisaille paint that would have decorated the hair and the eye and some of the shading here is completely lost. Also the enamel and the flowers is gone. So it's an interesting case study on how certain pieces degrade differently than others. We would hypothesize that maybe all of these pieces weren't fired the same way or together in the kiln. However, the paint loss is what it is, and it's very difficult. I mean, it's an irreversible process. So the metal matrix also degrades, again, exacerbated by water, as well as, just bearing the weight of the window over time with inadequate support. This example on the left, this is actually copper foil. Copper foil, when it's first executed, is nice and shiny and flat and consistent. This is obviously sort of all roughed up and looking like it's been outside in the rain forever. It's actually completely missing here. Metal corrodes, and that's what you're looking at. In the glass, or excuse me, in the lead matrix here, the white powder, that this is the beginning of lead carbonate, which is a stage of advanced oxidation of lead. The lead carbonate is essentially the lead becoming powder over time, through a chemical reaction to water. And, it is friable. It should be considered dangerous. If you're handling this, you should be wearing the proper PPE. Here, the flange has completely separated from the heart of the lead. And I included this example on the right because sometimes we see broken solder joints. So at the joint here where the solder would be, the lead and the solder might separate just from sort of inconsistent weight support from the bars. When you start seeing breaks in a cane like this, not near a joint, one is one, it can be managed, it can be repaired. But when you start seeing this, multiple times in every strip of lead, that is something to be concerned about. As I touched upon before, with the chemical recipe not being 100% correct, besides the pitting process, what we can see is something called crizzling, which you're seeing here on the left in this sort of yellow amber glass. This is not an intentional craquelé type of finish. What's happening here is the base glass is chemically unstable and it is fracturing from the inside out. And it actually will basically turn to sand and fall out over time. Again, this is a very difficult process. There's things we can do to stabilize this as conservators, but we can't put it back together, without a lot of glue. And here is what crizzling looks like in reflected light. So with a light shining on it, and you can see the very rough texture of this glass. And if you've ever seen a piece of glass before, you know that has a very smooth, shiny surface typically. Bowing, this is something I like to talk about because people are often concerned when they see it, which in certain instances it absolutely is concerning. On the left, it's kind of hard to capture in a photograph, but you can see right here how there's clearly a hinge point. This is not uncommon in rectangular windows like this or in diamond quarry windows. It's sort of a design flaw, I guess you could say. The more support the window has, the better it will stay over time. You can always add support later. It does not necessarily mean that the window is falling out in terms of the left-hand example. The right-hand example is a different story, as you can see. This is severe. I mean, it's completely collapsing in on itself. The story with this one is that the circular area is actually triple plated. There's 3 layers of glass there. The rest of the panel has just 1 layer of glass. And these 2 little tiny flat support bars, these little baby bars, are just not strong enough to hold up this window in the frame. So it has started to collapse in on itself. Now, this is a potentially dangerous and serious situation. It is falling apart. This is something that, needed to be dealt with immediately. Lack of maintenance. As stewards of historic buildings, this is something we all deal with all the time. Mostly, it's unintentional. Sometimes you inherit it. Other times there's just not the cash flow needed to do what needs to be done. But of course, any project that is put off and any time materials degraded ultimately becomes a bigger and more expensive project. I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure you all know. Wood windows are usually my biggest challenges in churches where they have not been painted and maintained over the years. This one's particularly egregious. You can see the protective glazing is falling out, the wood's falling out. It's, to the street. It's done. It needs significant intervention, if not entire replacement. It's really quite bad. In the center, I include this picture in every lecture I ever give because I'm hoping if I put it out into the universe, something miraculous will happen. This window is in the South Bronx. The congregation is dwindled to the point where it's basically non-existent. There is no money. And the original slate roof from the 1850s has been leaking for decades. It got into the plaster wall, and this frame, you can't see it off camera. You can just see the beginning of it. There's a balcony. And I could stand up here and put my entire fist to the outside around the edge of this frame. It is no longer tied into the building. The water got underneath to the blocking. You can kind of see how this side is taller than this side. This is slumped into the stool. It's, quite a dangerous situation. It's just coming into the building, the entire frame. At some point in the past, someone took these steel beams to try to, I guess, force the window back upright. I'm not sure, but they tied it into the wood frame, not into the stonework or the masonry in any meaningful way. So it's just, I'm not a structural engineer, but the steel has to be just adding weight to gravity, and it's pulling it inward. They have the pews in front of this window roped off so no one the very limited congregation doesn't sit in front of it on Sundays. But I can tell you that I would not allow my family to eat dinner in front of this window. It's extremely serious. Previous poor restorations are something that I spend probably most of my time fixing. A well-intentioned volunteer dealt with a leak by covering everything with butyl caulk. You can imagine how difficult that is, let alone disfiguring. On the right-hand side, this is from Trinity Church on Wall Street. In the past, there was a stream of thought that broken glass should be replaced. You can see the quality. These are 1843 Victorian painting, and you can see the poor replacement that sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, what do we do to fix these things? Cleaning. Cleaning is super important. It sounds obvious, but it is a cheap, easy way to make sure that we're doing proper maintenance. This is a 2 halves of a whole. The left is before the panel that has not been cleaned. Obviously, the right has been. There's a huge aesthetic improvement once it's installed, but from a conservation standpoint, the dirt and the dust, is just a place for water molecules to cling to for longer. So if the window is clean, it helps reduce the amount of time condensation is sitting on the window. We do the best we can to not replace anymore. Again, these examples are from Trinity Church on Wall Street. You can see the ox. Someone did let it instead of replacing it in the past, which is great. We were able to use a very high grade epoxy resin called Hextol. The refractive index of Hextol is very close to that of glass, which means it transmits light in basically the same way to the naked eye. And you can see that we could glue them back together. And although it's a subtle change, it's a very important change. It really restores readability to this section of the window. And on the right, a couple of befores and afters of badly damaged glass, which we were able to glue back together and not having to replace. You know, this glass is from the 1840s. It's extremely important. This is one of my favorite examples. This is from Woodlawn Cemetery, Christ in the Garden. On the left, you can see, you know, the paint loss in his hair and his beard and the rays of light is, you know, significant. And there's a little missing piece here. What we were able to do, we did not take this window apart. We did not relet it. We cleaned it and we used a product called Gold Size, which is used in gilding. It is mixed with glass paint and applied to the exterior side of the window because there's no historic glass paint on the exterior side of this window. So we were able to apply it there to restore readability to the design. This is a completely reversible process. So it really sticks to the Department of the Interior guidelines and the international standards for the care of stained glass. We actually found the missing piece. It was on the floor underneath a big pile of leaves. And we put it right back in, we glued it right back in. Only this piece had to be removed from the lead matrix in order to do that. So this was a big success because it's such a huge improvement with really, you know, quite minor work overall. Full disclosure, the before and after were taken at 2 different times of the year. So the paint color did not change this greatly. It's just winter versus summer. And, you know, the paint is more vibrant in the right-hand side. On the occasion that you do have to replace something, you obviously want to do it as subtly as possible. We have Solomon here. I don't know what happened to him before me, but this whole section of glass was replaced with clear glass that had been painted with acrylic and blue spray paint, which was horrible and ugly and just, I mean, it was really an eyesore to the client. It was a big problem. So, and of course it wasn't original. So although many times past restorations are important and they can be considered part of the history of the window, this had such a distraction from the rest of the history of the window that after consideration, we opted to replace it. And you can see how this was carefully painted to match the rest of the existing original sky. Here it is in reflected light. You know, you really can't tell that it wasn't always there, which is great. Any replacement pieces are always signed by the studio. So future conservators will know what we did. We also added some additional support because they're big panels with big pieces of glass, and I just wanted to make sure that he would be standing up for a long time. The best tool we have in our arsenal is something called environmental protective glazing. Some of you might know it by the term isothermal glazing. And what that is the new protective glazing, which is typically laminated or tempered glass, is installed in the original glazing groove, and the stained glass is moved to the interior of the building, put in a bronze frame, and essentially hung like a painting. And what that does is it creates an interspace for air. You leave a space for airflow at the bottom and at the top. What this does is it keeps the stained glass, the front and the back of it. First of all, it's no longer the primary weather barrier, which is good. Second of all, it keeps both sides, you know, very close in temperature, so that avoids condensation from forming. And that is what we want to happen. We do not want condensation forming on the stained glass and sitting there and degrading the glass and the lead. This is a way, if the lead is aged, but not quite necessary to replace at this time, this is a really good way to keep it that way. If you install it in an isothermal or environmental protective glazing system, the lead is not going to further degrade at a rate that would require a replacement. Here is that process. You can see the bronze U-channel frames. We did this. This is the chancel window of Trinity Wall Street. These panels are very large, so we added plenty of bars for support. Here it is being installed. You can see the laminated glass in the original glazing groove and the panels on the interior. Here's a close-up view. And you can see there's a lead light shield around the perimeter to block any sun coming through. And after installation, you really cannot tell that this is not in its normal stone setting. We're really proud of this. It's going to keep this extremely important. I mean, this is the earliest figural window in Manhattan from Abner Stevenson and Richard Upjohn in 1846. We really want to make sure that it lives on. Some parting words before we get to the Q&A. If you are handling a stained glass project on your own, just a couple of questions to ask, because I'm often called after a contractor has already been to the building. Contractor and studio location. where is the firm located? Are they 200 miles away? Are they 2,000 miles away? Is their price the lowest, even though they're 2,000 miles away? These are all questions to consider. The background of the person who is pitching you, are they a conservator? Have they worked on a bench? Are they the one doing the work, or are they a sales representative? Not that all salespeople are bad. That's not what I'm saying. Some firms tend to use a calculation of square footage of how to treat windows. I hope I made it very clear that these things are not a one size fits all square footage, price per square foot type of solution. Everything needs to be very carefully considered and personalized to the individual window. We buy carpet in square feet. We do not, conserve stained glass in square feet. Ask for a condition survey, an explanation of the existing condition. Ask for the qualifications and completed projects similar in nature. Follow up with those references. You'd be surprised how many of those references are bogus. If you hear a lot of blanket statements and generalizations like the lifespan of lead is 100 years, that's my least favorite one. Lead is not Cinderella's Cinderella's chariot that's going to turn into a pumpkin at the stroke of midnight at exactly 100 years. There's plenty of lead that's older than 100 years that does not need to be re-leaded. So please just keep that in mind. The fear-mongering statements of your windows are about to fall out. I look at so many windows, and I would say less than 5% of the windows I look at are actually about to fall out. Really quick and simple, easy one, ask for proof of insurance. That's been actually an issue lately, so that's why I put it in here. So that is my, introductory spiel, and I would love to answer some questions now or in the future. Here is my contact information. So I guess I'll hand it back to Melissa to help conduct the Q&A.
Yes, bravo. That was excellent. Absolutely fascinating. It is not my area of expertise by any means, and I am just wowed by the photos that you showed and the experiences you've had. To our audience, you can unmute yourself to ask a question or type it in the chat, and I will go ahead and read it for you. And we've got people ready to go here. I've already got a question in the chat from Ira. It says, great presentation. I have heard the symbols and iconography that appear in stained glass would have had explicit meanings, associations for the audience of the time. I'm thinking in particular of floral motifs, which are very abstractly depicted by the 1870s. Are there any resources that can help you interpret your stained glass or decipher the associations of these motifs?
That's a really good question, and I will do my best to muddle through it because I'm not a historian. I'm a conservator, but I do research when I can. There are a lot of published volumes out there about iconography and symbology that I use. Funerary art has its own thing. Meanings that you'll see in church or not in churches or in different settings or don't always carry over in funerary art. If you can tell, I spent a lot of time working in cemeteries. So I would just say you would have to consult your, local library and research to try to find art historical text to support. There's a lot of print sources that were ultimately turned into stained glass windows, especially kind of in the period that you're talking about. We see a lot of German painters, Vorst, for example, his work was copied into stained glass quite a bit. So print sources are another option. I really hope that helped. This is not exactly my wheelhouse.
That was an honest and helpful answer. Thank you. Anyone else? Again, you can type it in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm going to pose a question while people are perhaps typing. If anyone on here is responsible for the stewardship of stained glass, do you know of any particular grants specifically related to stained glass preservation or restoration that they should be looking into?
So that's a very difficult question because, as I think a lot of people know, the separation of church and state and some recent lawsuits do not allow, government grant money to go to churches. So if there's landmarks in some like Woodlawn Cemetery is a national landmark, so they are able to apply for the federal money. But to my knowledge, there are no specific grants for the care of stained glass windows. There are grants to the American Glass Guild for education. For practitioners and folks who are wanting to attend conferences and take classes. I should also say that the Stained Glass Association of America is a really good resource. Their website has a lot as well. But as far as grants, it's really quite tough.
Thank you. Here's a question in the chat from Mark. Which central New Jersey location would you suggest for seeing excellent examples of stained glass work? The chapel at Princeton University is probably one of the most amazing I've ever seen. Does the rest of the campus offer great stained glass artwork, or anywhere else in central Jersey that you're particular to?
So there is a wonderful, for the Tiffany lovers out there is a wonderful Tiffany census. You can Google Cambridge 2000 and find Wayne Butcher's amazing census organized by state of where all of the Tiffany windows are. He has also identified other items of interest in a lot of those buildings. But to be more specific about your question, come to Freehold. We have some really good stained glass here. There's some wonderful stained glass in Rumston. Honestly, it's kind of everywhere. Have to start looking and going in the doors, knocking on doors. The Princeton University, the conic windows in Princeton are great. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything super specific, but.
The guide you noted, fascinating.
I had a question if I could.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm very impressed with what you did. When I was in college, I, for some reason, took up some stained glass work, and I actually did stained glass pieces with the lead and the fillers, and it was fascinating. Just I was in a design school kind of thing. I didn't know that there were stained glass windows, and I've seen many, and I like that sort of thing. That had 3 layers of glass. That really was a stretch for me to understand. When I look, just say, I don't know, the university chapel, or if there are other buildings that are easily available, but if I were to look at one, or look at my own church windows, we have some nice ones. Is there something you can look for to say, oh, that's a triple piece of glass. There's something on the other side, and you can kind of think through what they did and layering it to get the color and the light. And is there an easy way to see triple glass work?
Yeah, so if you look closely, you should be able to see the plating. It would be raised. It would look like a second layer of glass raised above those surrounding it. So the lead would appear taller almost. And there is a shadow line associated with that if you're looking from an angle. So perhaps if you, stood at maybe, I don't know, 9, 10 o'clock at the window and looked to see on the face if there was anything raised, you should be able to identify where some of the plates are. It's a little bit more, you're going to see it more often in opalescent windows, Tiffany, Lafarge, that type of thing. Does that help?
Yeah. Good. I'll keep looking. Thank you very much. Very, very, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Here's another question from the chat. For cleaning, does it always have to be done by a professional?
Great question. So as a conservator, I'm going to tell you yes. So it really depends on whether or not the glass is painted. So you can't always tell by the naked eye whether glass paint is stable or not. Sometimes you can, obviously. I showed you some egregious examples of angels with missing faces, but a lot of the times, you don't know that it's unstable unless you test an area. And frankly, you need a microscope to do that properly. So if it's unpainted glass and you wanted to consider cleaning it yourself, I would suggest cotton or a cotton deionized water. And if you really need a solvent, I would try Orvis paste, lightly applied. You want to avoid the lead. You don't want to go over the putty. Contact your local stained glass studio for cleaning, I would say. But if you had a piece in your home and you wanted to try to do it yourself and you were confident it was unpainted, that's how I would, that's how I would go.
Of course, urging caution, of course, that. Thank you. Here's a question. What companies specialize in placing environmental glazing?
That's a good question. So stained glass, there's a lot of types of stained glass studios. You have studios that specialize in new work, conservation studios, restoration studios. And not every firm does protective glazing. Closest to us, it's not Monmouth County, but closest to us is Feminella and Associates in Branchburg. They do beautiful protective glazing. They are not, there are certain protective glazing systems that are sold as proprietary whatever that are a completely separate unit, kind of like an IGU. It's a completely separate thing. Whereas Feminella is using laminated glass and tempered glass in very minimalistic framing, so the stained glass is still able to steal the show as it should. So I would start there. I don't know exactly what your needs are, but they're a good option.
Thanks for your question. I don't see any more in the chat. Did anyone want to unmute and ask a question? Now, Brianne, we've shared your contact information and your website. Are you available for consultations? And should people just reach out to you about your fee structure and things like that if they're interested?
Of course, absolutely. I would be happy to do it. And I really hope that you come and see me on Saturday in Freehold, because I can answer questions then and talk at length.
Awesome. For any of you who are interested in more information on grants, check out the chat. A few people have put links that they think you might find helpful. Other questions from our audience? Well, let's end.
You know what? I just wanted to jump in and say thank you to Lindsay. She is 100% right about those grant opportunities. I'm sorry, Q&As are hard. I thought I prepared for every possible eventuality, but here we are.
Please don't apologize. Anybody who volunteers to do a program that has Q&A is brave, and it's impossible to remember everything off the cuff, and you shared your contact info. But let's end with this. I am always so fascinated by how people come to specialize in their areas of expertise. Like, this is such a niche topic. How did this come to be your area of expertise? How did you come to be studying this?
Yeah, thank you. So I went to Temple University's art school, and I was graduating at college at a time that the millennials, we all went to graduate school because it was not the best time economically. And I had an undergraduate professor who suggested that conservation would be a really good fit for me. I kind of have a type A personality, and working as an artist was, trying to pursue art history was just seemed a little unstable for me. And I really like to work with my hands. I am a creator at heart. So that is kind of where the idea was born from. And then I started looking at programs. I was actually considering general conservation, objects conservation at one of the American programs. I had studied abroad in England and loved it. And on a long list of conservation programs, the University of York was, and I did a little digging and was totally captivated. So I made a series of decisions at 22 years old that were not as informed or considering what debt could be like or any of those things. But I'm glad that I did, because I got an incredible education. And I don't know if I made this clear or not, but there is no formal education for stained glass in this country. And that is why I'm sort of giving tips and tricks about asking contractors or whomever you're consulting for stained glass projects, because we're not all on the same page here. The Europeans are a little bit more centralized. They're following something called the Corpus Vitriorum guidelines that I can make available to anyone who's interested in reading them. They are philosophical underpinnings that are meant to guide everyone on good practice for stained glass conservation. Preservation Brief 33, what we have here in the US for stained glass, is really desperately needs to be updated. So if there's anyone from the National Park Service here, please, please come and find me. But the limited resources here could be problematic. And not only, I opened the consulting firm. I really liked this. I worked at Northeast Stained Glass in Newton for a wonderful man, Jim Pinto, and I would have stayed there forever if I could have. But there is a real difference in how Americans view and treat their stained glass than in Europe. Here it is really viewed as part of the building envelope, as a trade, as a craft, really not as a high art form that it really should be recognized as. It's not treated with the same level of distinction or tenderness as, say, a painting or a sculpture and those conservators. And that really is shown by the fact there's not an academic program for it here at all. So that's how I ended up in New York. I didn't know all that when I started. I know it now. And part of, what's really what makes me feel really passionate is trying to help educate people and get the word out and point them. I can't answer every question, but I can point them in the direction of resources that should be able to.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked that question because that's really informative. And in the interim, it looks like Paul has raised his hand. So Paul, do you have time for one more question? I know we're almost at an hour. You okay, Brianne, for one more question?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Paul,
you.
please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry I joined late. Possibly this has been answered, but I have a church in Bradley Beach that may be demolished soon with extraordinary stained glass windows. And I'd like to try to identify a resource for identifying where these windows were made and by whom. I've been researching it in the Methodist archives at Drew University, and I've come up blank. Basically, some of them look suspiciously like Tiffany windows, and I really want to find an expert who can come in and at least point me in the right direction.
Okay, so the thing I want to say first, so I don't forget, is that there are two Tiffany experts on this call. So if you send me an email, I can connect you with them. Otherwise, though, have you checked the building meeting minutes by any chance? Do those exist?
I have not been able to locate them back at the period when they actually purchased the windows. No, and
Okay,
nobody in the last 50 years had any idea where they were from.
This is a problem. Stained glass artists and fabricators, manufacturers did not always or even often sign their work. This is a question I get asked almost daily. There's newspaper hunting that you could do. There's obviously local archives. I do not know if they exist. You can reach out to some of us professionals to see if we recognize them.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of windows. You never know what, and cartoons were reused a lot of the time. So there are times where I'll see a figural window and not know who made it, and then see it in a church somewhere else and it is signed. And it's like, oh my God, this was Lamb Studios or this was whomever. So, otherwise, research wise, there are the Architectural League. Those are the New York Public Library. On occasion, that's in there. Again, I think you might have missed my comment earlier about the Tiffany census. There's a book by Alistair Duncan, which a lot of windows are stated, where they're from, but there's an online resource. If you Google Cambridge 2000 Tiffany census, you can search by place. He doesn't, his name is Wayne, who runs it. He doesn't have them all, I don't think, but he's probably pretty close at this point. He's an excellent researcher.
Thank
Paul,
you very
if you
much.
send me an email, I can probably send you some more resources when I'm not on the spot and I have some time to think. And I will also connect you with the Tiffany experts as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Paul, I just
Appreciate it.
dropped Brianne's website and contact info and the link to that census in the chat, if you can see it there, so you can touch base offline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This was so interesting and informative. We really appreciate it. And I hope, as you said, everyone that's on this call will come out and meet you in person with PNJ's tour of historic downtown Freehold this Saturday. You can get all the info you need about PNJ's upcoming events at preservationnj.org. Brianne, any last words before we close?
Oh, thank you all so much for coming. I really am so flattered that you wanted to come and hear a little bit about stained glass, and please feel free to reach out. I love questions, so thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.